Hello and welcome to XYZ Live, competing with those who draw dicks and those who suck them. Welcome to this installment of what is going to be part 2. Sorry about that. Part 2 of our deep dive into Mark Leibler, one of the key figures behind the Indigenous Voice to Parliament, the push for it, and probably the biggest Jewish backer of the Voice, and, well, I don't know. I would say primarily the promoter of it. And today we have, of course, myself, Fenian, Nolsey, and David Hiscox. How are we going, fellas?
All right.
Thanks for having me.
You got your internet working okay, David?
Yeah, it stopped being a whiny little bitch. I just had to slap it.
Okay. That's great. All right. Well, I guess we can get straight into it. So what we're going to do today is we're going to discuss parts 4 and 5 of Brenton Sanderson's installment on, well, actually, both on xyz.net.au, or you can head over to Occidental Observer for it. And this was a 5-part series that he wrote on, well, the man you can see on the screen right now, Mark Leibler, who is partner at Arnold Block Liebler, very solidified law firm in Australia, representing Brittany Higgins right now, something I only recently learned, and a whole range of other shady figures. So let's have a look, first of all, at part 4 of this series. And here we have old Mark Leibler with Julia Gillard. So what we're going to do here, just to kind of intro it, is we're going to talk about 2 leaders in particular that dared to cross Mark Leibler, or dared to cross the Jewish community or organized Jewry in Australia. And I really want to stress that these are not figures who you would call anti-Semites. And I mean, like, not even the way, say, Liebler calls Jeremy Corbyn an anti-Semite. It's just like actually what you would consider to be very, very minor things that just set them right off and drew their ire, and it seemed to have a lot of negative consequences for them in the long run. Anyway, to start off with part 4, this is talking about the formation of AJAC. And if that name sounds a lot like APAC, well, that's for good reason. So you had a range of Jewish groups up until the formation of AJAC in Australia. You still do, but AJAC is probably the most successful, the most well-funded, the one that has the ears of the most amount of politicians and movers and shakers in the country.
The most senior.
Yeah, you could say that. And it was very much modeled on APAC, the American Israel Public Affairs Committee. Ours is just called the Australia, Israel and Jewish Affairs Council. It's a very, very similar acronym. And by the way, of course, if you didn't know, the primary source for these articles is a book called The Power Broker, which is a biography of Mark Leibler, written by a fellow Jew, of course, David Gowenda. So at this point, you had Colin Rubenstein, who was running another Jewish organization, and he was saying that it was fairly ineffective at that point in time. So in the early 90s, himself, Mark Leibler, and a bunch of other wealthy Jews pulled their money together, created AJAC, and Liebler joined as chairman. And that was when, Jewish lobbying in this country started to ramp up even further than it already had. So, to give you an idea of what was happening at this point in time, they were pushing rapidly for multiculturalism. And Colin Rubenstein was adamant, it says here, relentlessly lobbies on issues that affect Australian Jews, such as anti-Semitism and the health of multiculturalism. Rubenstein insists that multiculturalism has served the Jewish community well and responds vociferously to any critiques of a policy that is deliberately designed to harm the group genetic interests of the white Australian majority. And down here, we've actually got an example from the Jewish author of The Power Broker himself, Goenda. So this quote here, this is where he's referencing his time as the editor of The Age. And this regarded the Age's coverage of various incidents in the Middle East. So in particular, on the Israel-Palestine conflict. And if there was just anything at all that they were printing that was remotely critical of Israel, they would be inundated with complaints from AJAC or people associated with them. And as he puts it here, they were smart, relentless, knew their stuff, were blunt, sometimes to the point of rudeness in their criticisms of the paper and some of its journalists and commentators. And remember, this is actually criticism being directed at a fellow Jew as well. He was the editor of the paper, and hardly a guy who was about to take a pro-Palestine stance. Yet, even by those standards, this was not good enough for AJAC. So it showed just how pushy they were with their agenda and how willing they were to push it.
Again, I love the way that Sanderson has contrasted this with their behaviour when it comes to Australia. What you have here is them clearly standing up for their own ethnic interests with regard to reporting in the newspaper, while what you have here is them clearly standing up for their own ethnic interests with regard to reporting.
Absolutely. And just always saying that it's actually not harming white Australians in any way. It's always just about actually furthering their own interests. And well, have you guys heard of the Rambam fellowships before?
Yeah, we were talking about it. Oh, were we talking about it in the last week, or do I just remember it from editing these articles?
Oh, might be a little from column A and column B. I think they might have mentioned this a little bit in part 3. But look, basically what this is where powerful people or people with influence and reach in Australia are wined and dined by the Jewish lobby. So politicians, prominent business leaders, and journalists, definitely journalists. A lot of them are taken over here. So they're flown over to Israel. They're put up in 5-star hotels. They introduce them and network them with various Jewish leaders while they're over there. And all the while get to promote the idea that Israel is just the best place on earth that can do no wrong. And, it seems to have really worked. And what this article is going to get to soon is how actually back in 2001, this was when Julia Gillard was elected to Parliament, and they actually sent her off on a Rambam right back then. So, they get them early. They get them right at the beginning of their political career so that they can groom them into being good for the pro-Israel lobby. And it's an investment that pays off for them further down the track. And not just Gillard. She's probably just the best example that comes from this article, I think.
She's the most bitchy example.
Probably.
All right. It looks
Okay.
like Odyssey has figured out its problem. It was down in some servers around Oceania.
Is it? Okay.
No, it's
I'm
back up
checking.
now. I just checked the
Uh,
server things. It's back up now, so
all
we're
right.
good.
I'm checking the stream on Odyssey. I'm checking the stream on YouTube. I
We're
can
good.
see stuff going, so I hope it's good. All right. Shout out, guys, if you can't hear us or see us or whatever. But
Just spam F in the chat. That tends to work.
Yeah, I'll do that. All right.
All right.
Okay. So look, among the journalists that you have wined and dined here, very interesting. These are all, fairly well-known people. Greg Sheridan, Andrew Bolt, Rita Bahani, and Jeanette Ulbrichtson. And Rita Bahani, she would have to be the only fucking Iranian who's actually been wined and dined in Israel. That is crazy.
Something tells me she doesn't want to go back to Iran.
Yes.
Yeah, Jesus, what would happen to her over there? And Rita Bahani always has that Rabbi
Mark Leibler.
Botiek. No, you guys know that rabbi called Rabbi Botiek or Botich? I don't know how the hell to say his last name. He's always on, promoting all the regular Jewish stuff.
The guy that they got on to say that he found the Saturday Night Live sketch by the black comedian, what's his name? They got him on to say that to say that he found it hilarious and he thought it was brilliant satire because they had to control the narrative. That was hilarious.
Yeah, I think so. I think that what he was doing at that point in time was basically people thought that there was too much outrage going on, and basically people were saying Jews have no sense of humor and they're offended by anything. And so he had to come out and basically be the other side of the kosher sandwich and say, no,
Yes.
no, we're not offended. That's fine. You can do that. Okay. Like, again, it's just disagreement over.
You can't pin
tactics.
us here. We need to slip through your fingers like slime. You can't define us. We're a religion and a race. We're not monolithic. But by God, you won't be arguing with us when you actually touch on something that hurts.
That idea, I know we've mentioned that a lot on here, but that actually comes up quite prominently in part 5. The idea of, when Jews disagree, it's over strategy and tactics, not over holistic policy. It never is.
Yep.
But yeah, some of these other names, Jeanette Ulbrichtson, that's a real shame because I actually quite like her articles in The Australian. In terms of where I've gotten most of the good stuff when we covered Brittany Higgins, I've got it from her. She's been really, really good. Like, for example, the stolen designer jacket from Linda Reynolds' office. Jeanette Ulbrichtson is about the only person who's talked about that. Andrew Bolt is a guy who is really good on Aboriginal issues, I think. You can tell he is a huge reader of Quadrant, and he has often had Keith Windshuttle on the show. Bolt actually even launched Volume 3 of the Fabrication of Aboriginal History, which was on the Stolen Generations. He actually launched that at a Quadrant event for Windshuttle. But this, I think, is in part why Bolt continues to cuck really hard for Israel, despite the fact that Jewish prosecutors went after him over his articles, basically attacking white people for pretending to be Aboriginal. And a Jewish judge found him guilty. And he was so amazed that he was thrown under the bus by a Jewish community that he had shilled so hard for. Perhaps the reason why he's willing to forgive them is because, they send him on the old Rambam. That could be why. I don't know how
Unless they didn't send him down to Ram Ranch. Oh, wait, he may have enjoyed that.
Yeah. But I mean, look, some of the other names here. Scott Morrison and Bill Shorten, when they were backbenchers. Julia Gillard, as I mentioned. Something that Liebler has been very good at doing, like we mentioned in one of the other ones when we talked about Paul Keating, which was he could kind of see that the end was drawing near for Bob Hawke. And so after the first challenge, he issued Paul Keating that letter saying, congratulations, and you're going to win eventually. Liebler and I think many others in the Jewish lobby are very good at picking the potential leaders early on. Even when they first enter parliament, they're like, I see this person as becoming a future leader. Therefore, we've got to get to them early because in a few years, they could be leading this party or they could even be prime minister. So we've got to get to them and we've got to start bribing them and grouping them very, very early on. And they're good at that.
Yeah, and it's worth reiterating the point that this is how Jewish power works, because we're not arguing that they put their own puppets in place. We're arguing that they're very good at sniffing the political wind. They're good at recognizing, okay, this is where Australian opinion is heading. And they back each horse to make sure that they can be the whisperer when whoever gets into power next gets into power. That's how it works. So it's not controlling every aspect. It's about having their hands on the key levers at the right times.
Yeah, and also notice that this isn't party specific. These are people from both major parties as well. Yeah. It's not like they're just going for one. They're controlling both sides every step of the way. And so you've got another quote here from the Power Broker where they're talking about how this was actually a very common tactic used back in the Soviet Union. So, you had wealthy Westerners and that who, like, early example, I guess, might be George Bernard Shaw, who was the Irish playwright. He was a huge advocate for Soviet communism. And one of the reasons why was because, when he went over there, they just absolutely lavished praise upon him and, put him up at the best hotels, took him to the best restaurants and everything. And, of course, you're going to be impressed if that is the treatment that you're giving. And, obviously, we have to remember, well, the Soviet leadership was majority Jewish back then, okay? So it's a Jewish strategy that goes back decades, if not hundreds of years.
I was going to say it's the exact same style of treatment that pharmaceutical companies do for like doctors, because technically they're not allowed to give them money. They're not allowed to give them money, but we're just going to gift you like a nice little stay in like a really high end hotel, and hey, you just get comp bottle service. We're not giving you anything. There's no monetary value being exchanged here, but hey, here's a big little thing that would cost like tens of thousands of dollars.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's a very common tactic. I mean, when a company donates money to a political party and, they just say, oh, there's no strings attached to it. But, we are going to consider giving you another donation next year. But right now we're only considering it. You obviously don't need to put it in writing, okay? This money does have strings attached to it. If you don't make good on certain implied understandings, well, you're not going to get any more money. That's the way it works. And that's the way you can also have plausible deniability and say that you're not actually bribing them. Okay. So this part of the article ends by talking about how Liebler's organization sponsored more foreign trips for members of the House of Reps than any other country. And yeah, this is another big point I've got to make here. I've found that, like, if you maybe get a typical normie conservative to, if they've had a couple of beers, you might actually get them to say, look, I agree with you that in America, the Israel lobby, the Jewish lobby, is pretty powerful and might exert disproportionate influence. And yeah, I might agree with you that, Jews have too much control of Hollywood. But they don't have any control in Australia. What are you talking about? You're just being a conspiracy theorist or something. Oh, yes, they do. Yes, they do. And that's why you need to read Brenton Sanderson's stuff here. In many ways, Liebler and the other high-flying Jews here, like Colin Rubenstein, like Richard Pratt, Anthony Pratt, etc., have actually been harnessing a lot of very pro-Zionist energy right here in Australia. So actually, I think one of the quotes I might have missed here was, I'll just read it here because I put it in my notes. The effectiveness of Liebler and Rubenstein's activism can be gauged by the fact that over 70% of Australian Jews in all age groups, no matter their religious affiliations, even secular Jews, describe themselves as Zionists. Now, that's, say, compared to America, where you actually have a large amount of, I guess, what you could call liberal and reform Jews. Now, they're still pro-Israel, but, they may not describe themselves as Zionist. They're more interested in kind of internal subversion that they do through Hollywood and whatnot.
Yeah.
Rather than...
they're dildo rather than missile. Like old Jewish politics is formed around phallic objects. It's either the straight up dildo or it's the missile. They're going to kill Palestinians either by the dildo or by the missile. They're going to kill the West either by the dildo or by the missile.
That's a good way of putting it. Yeah, I mean, I think, you've got, like, let's say the secular reform liberal Jews who are they're the ones who promote vice, okay? They promote smut and pornography and drugs and indecency. And then you've got the hyper-Zionists who support a militaristic foreign policy that just wants to nuke the Arab world and help Israel grow bigger and bigger. They're sort of the two main factions of Jews.
Yeah.
And in America, I think they kind of evenly split. In Australia, they're actually more of the pro-Zionist, hawkish types. And actually, one of the ways you know about that, I think it's in part 5. Liebler actually says that around 50% of Australian Jews vote for the coalition. And then you've got about 40% for Labor and 10% other. In America, it's actually about 70% of Jews vote for the Democrats. And the rest vote for Republicans, of course. So in Australia, we seem to have the more sort of religious, orthodox, hawkish, neocon type Jews. And they're the Jews who actually give away much more of their money and will fundraise and sponsor activities like the, sending off our journalists and members of parliament to Israel. And, say, bankrolling the demolition of Palestinian houses and the construction of Jewish settlements in the West Bank. That Gupnik guy who owned one of the football clubs.
Melbourne.
One of you guys. Who was that?
He owned Melbourne, the Melbourne Football Club.
Right.
He prevented it merging with Hawthorn because, multiculturalism is bad or something.
That's right. You mentioned that last week, I think. Yeah. So that tends to be what we've got here. So, yeah, I mean, while, you might not see too many Jews on TV, maybe you only just know John Safran or something, or someone who looks like a Jew like Jeffrey Rush. That's because, they're much more focused on politics in Australia rather than culture, I would say. So, yeah, the last example.
I'd say, probably the reason why is in America you need to have a larger workforce for culture simply because it's a larger population. It only takes a smattering of Jews to kind of get into the doors that they need to over here to have the same equivalent power.
Yeah, I mean, also, I guess the fact that whether we like it or not, America is sort of like the cultural center of the world. They export... they have more cultural exports than any other country, okay? We may not like that, but it's probably true, okay? Hollywood is an enormous force, and that inevitably is going to attract those types. So, yeah. Like even Alan Dershowitz came over to speak at an AJAC function at the offices of Arnold Bloch Liebler, which is
he left his pants on, yeah?
Yeah, that's right. Well, he puts in brackets here of Jeffrey Epstein fame, of course. Okay, so let's get on to the next part of the article here. So this is where we talk about people who crossed Liebler and their demise, I guess you could say. Now, this is actually the part. I don't know if I agree 100% with Brenton Sanderson on this. As you can see by this subtitle, it says clashing with and then removing Prime Minister Rudd. If I've read the article correctly, I believe Sanderson is basically arguing that had it not been for this passport fiasco that we're about to go through, Kevin Rudd would have actually remained Prime Minister in 2010. He would not have been taken out by Julia Gillard.
And just the thing we're about to go through, just I'm going to prime all of you guys. This is a threat. This isn't like, oh dear, like we've got the access to print Australian passports. No, this is straight up a fucking threat. I just want everyone to just come in prime with that, because it's, the way it's written, obviously it's a political is it autobiography or is it just a biography?
It's a biography, yeah.
Biography.
Liebler didn't write it.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, dude, fucking Jesus Christ. Like, it's written in such a smarmy way. But yeah, no, like, holy fucking Christ.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. I called him David before. Michael Gowenda, sorry, is his name. So look,
here's a David, by the way.
Well, look, before we go into this, my position is that I do believe that, yes, Kevin Rudd definitely crossed the organised jury in this country. I think it was a factor in his downfall. But I would say that the biggest factor was simply the fact that Kevin Rudd was a psychopath, right? And I mean that literally.
Yeah.
He had all the traits. And, I don't think it's any coincidence that when he came back for Prime Minister for like the measly 2 months or whatever it was, 1/3 of the Labor front bench resigned and went to the back bench. And they had vowed to do so because they hated Kevin Rudd that much. You guys might have seen, like, the leaked video.
Yeah.
Where
holy shit.
That kind of stuff. There's also, like, the story of him berating a girl on a private flight because they didn't have white meat or something like that. Another time he abused hotel staff because there wasn't a hairdryer. Must be why his hair looks so great, I guess. And all of these stories, there was stories about, like, senior Labor staffers quitting and also even getting divorced because of the haphazard nature of Rudd's scheduling. He would constantly cancel meetings and reschedule them. He would have them at, like, weird times. It was not unusual to have, like, a 1 a.m. meeting with Rudd or something like that. And everyone around him just found it just absolutely chaotic and, like, just impossible to work with him. You can even see it even in that leaked video where he's swearing about how the translation into Chinese was too difficult for him because he was recording a message in Mandarin. He actually goes, "Tell him to cancel this meeting at 6 o'clock. I don't have the fucking patience to do it." So all of those things. The
psychopath part is that, like, if you remember his press conferences, or if you remember, like, any time that he was even interviewed by a journalist in an ad hoc fashion, he just came off of this as this huge fucking nerd. And those videos basically showed, like, oh, no, this is him behind the scenes. This is what he's actually like. And he's a sociopath because he is, throughout his life, like, fucking trained himself to put on this facade.
He was probably so much of a sociopath that he thought he could take on the Jews and win.
Yeah.
Yeah, that might have been it. He might have been a victim of his own hubris.
Yeah, if I could paraphrase Julia Gillard when she got stabbed, had the knife. When Rudd took the knife out of his own back and put it in hers, it's not only the Jews, but it had a fair bit to do with the Jews. I think that was my takeaway from this, because I agree with you. But like until I'd found out about this incident, this series of incidents, I thought it was just a case of the Canberra bubble missing the fact that they'd misread the whole political situation. But that's my take. I'm like, okay, I think it's part of it.
You've been enlightened.
Yeah. That's basically what I think here. It's like, this was definitely part of it, but it doesn't explain the whole picture. And I mean, remember, Kevin Rudd was a serial leaker as well. Like it including like before he became prime minister, he was always accused of it. And look, he denied it, but it was actually undeniable, because I remember he was on an episode of Q&A. This was when he was on the backbench and Julia Gillard was prime minister, and of course he was constantly sniping at her the whole time. And he said that when he was prime minister, and because remember, one of the other factors that brought him down was the ETS, the fact that he couldn't get it through the Senate, even though, you know, it was the Greens who blocked it in the end because they said it didn't go far enough. But he said that during cabinet meetings that Wayne Swan and Julia Gillard wanted to scrap it because they saw it as too politically difficult and that they should put it on the back burner. That was confidential cabinet information, and he revealed it on live national TV on Q&A. All right. So he was undoubtedly a leaker. There's no doubt that he was doing that. And he did that very deliberately as a way of knocking Gillard down in the polls a couple of notches.
The chat is making gay jokes about Kevin Rudd being a serial leaker. You can put two and two together. I'm not doing it for you.
I think it's hilarious that the most popular thing he ever did was go to that strip club.
Yeah.
There was that. It humanized him. Okay. All right, so we'll talk about the passports now. And what you're looking at is actually an example. This was one of the passports that was forged by Mossad, which of course is the equivalent of the CIA in Israel. So what they were doing was they were forging various Australian passports so that these Mossad agents could assume different identities and travel around the world. And where exactly do they travel? They travel to Middle Eastern countries, of course. So we've all heard about how Mossad agents, for example, take out Iranian nuclear scientists who may be involved in Iran's nuclear program. Well, this was where they actually went over to the United Arab Emirates and they took out a suspected Islamic militant. And that was with an Australian passport. So Rudd was briefed on this by ASIO. ASIO basically said to him, this is an obvious attack on Australian sovereignty. We don't tolerate this from any other country. Why should we tolerate it from Israel? So Kevin Rudd condemned it. He called on the practice to stop. And it was deemed to be, I believe Liebler described it as an overreaction because it was an attack, not necessarily on, the practice of passport forging, but it was an attack on Israel conducting its foreign policy. And he was just saying, well, look, we're surrounded by all of these Arabs and Muslims who want to kill us. Don't we have the right to go secretly into their countries and, just assassinate
Don't we
them?
have the right to forge your passports?
Yeah. And, if you want to get a better idea of like these practices that Mossad does, this is the tip of the iceberg. Go and watch the movie Munich, which, funnily enough, is actually directed by Steven Spielberg. But I think Spielberg sort of shows his hand in that movie. That was when Palestinian militants killed some Jews at the Munich Olympic Games in the 70s, I think it was. And then all of those who were involved, even indirectly, were just taken out in various countries, mainly in Europe, I believe, where they were forging passports and other forms of identity. And they were doing things like planting bombs in their apartments. Shit like that, And then, of course, they just piss off back to Israel. And, for example, they killed a guy in France. and France were demanding that Israel extradite those Mossad agents back to France so they could put them on trial for murder, as you should do. And of course, Israel just gave the middle finger.
Yep.
So yeah,
Hitler was right. If the Jews have their own state, it'll become a hive for fucking criminal action, or like a fucking, what's the term? Safe haven. I guess safe haven is probably the best one. A safe haven for criminal action.
It ties in a great deal with what we were talking about last week, because one of the key achievements of Liebler was to get Australia to overturn its ban on dual citizenship, and specifically for Jews living in Australia. And so, like, this is like another slap in the face by Israel. Like, we've made like this great concession to Jews and to Israel by allowing them to have dual citizenship of Israel and Australia, and this is what they do with our passports. And again, it just ties into that whole thing that was mentioned at the start of the article, how like anti-Semitism and the health of multiculturalism in Australia are the key, we're like the key concerns of Jews here in Australia. So it's another example of them using multiculturalism to achieve their ethnic goals and to support their ethnic nationalist home country.
Well, again, Israel is perpetually threatened by strong states, and say what you want about the location and the original construction of Australia. There was a decent opportunity all the way through until the 90s to make this like a white stronghold, and everyone knew, like, throughout the late 80s and 90s, that Oceania was going to be the next geopolitical focus point, and it's very quickly becoming that now. But yeah, like the idea that this needed to be nipped in the bud of world Zionism, and especially for the international Jew, yeah, that was always going to be a fucking thing. That was always going to be one of their projects. Fucking us up was, like just taking the and I call the US the little Satan, even though it's geographically larger, because it is the one being controlled by the great Satan. Taking them out of the picture, this would be their next focal point.
Yeah.
Right. So just after the passport affair, you also had the Gaza Freedom Flotilla. So these were 6 ships that tried to break the blockade of the Gaza Strip and attempted to deliver military aid to the people there. So Israeli soldiers actually stormed those ships from helicopters. They killed 9 people as a result of that. And just think about that. These were ships that were delivering humanitarian aid, okay? They weren't delivering bombs. So Rudd actually issued a statement. So he said, any use of violence under the circumstances that we have seen, he said, we condemn that. So, yeah, they didn't like that either. You can't condemn the killing of 9 people who were trying to deliver humanitarian aid. Okay. So this resulted, that and the passports affair did actually result in an Israeli diplomat being expelled from Australia. And Liebler, it says here, like, initially was somewhat apologetic over the comments that he made and the expulsion of the diplomat. And said, so Goenda notes that Liebler saw the incident as especially difficult, time-consuming, and troubling for him because it was specifically about the relationship between Australia and Israel, and because it was hard to defend what the Israelis had done. So there you go. He was actually saying it right there. He was like, I can't actually defend what happened here. He was like, I know it was wrong what they did. It was wrong to forge Australian passports and kill this guy in Dubai. It was wrong to storm these ships and kill 9 people. But he still shouldn't have said anything about it, Okay, so
How dare you hold
Yeah.
Jews responsible for their own actions?
Right.
Oh dear God. You're holding us to a higher standard. The highest standard is basic human rights. Oh God, it's another Shoah. And they're building an end tower in Odyssey, of course.
Yeah. Okay, so Kevin Rudd, in his second volume of memoirs, and Jesus, what a fucking egotistical prick. Like, he has one volume of memoirs, right, that's about his life before Prime Minister, and then he has another volume about his time as Prime Minister, which, by the way, amounted to 2.5 years. How do you
This-
write like a bloody 500-page volume just on that? But anyway, he said that the Israeli lobby tried to menace him for his strong response to the passport affair. And then he talks about this meeting that he had of the National Security Committee of Cabinet. The head of ASIO had urged him to act firmly and decisively. All agreed with this recommendation, except for Julia Gillard, whom Rudd knew for a fact that Julia had been cultivating the Israeli lobby in Australia. Okay, so there's an element of bias there. We have to point that out. It's obvious that Kevin Rudd does not like Julia Gillard, and it's obvious why. But nonetheless, it is true that Gillard had been cultivated by them, and she was trying to cultivate them in return as well. She very much was from the beginning. And Julia Gillard, from her time entering Parliament, even though she was seen as of the far left, she was from the, I believe, what they call the soft left faction of the Labour Party. She was also a member of Socialist Forum in her university days, which is, much like Socialist Alternative or Socialist Alliance, those kind of, campus type ferals.
Fucking.
She
Yeah,
never had an
I can't say the
anti-Israel
next
one.
F word after that.
Yeah. But surprisingly, right, those kind of groups like Socialist Alternative, they will signal against Israel. They won't do it on racial grounds, of course. They'll never tread that territory. But, they will pay lip service and they'll support the Palestinian cause. Julia Gillard was actually never like that. And yeah, part of the reasons why was because, she was just kind of lobbied from very, very early on, as soon as she entered Parliament. So, they tried to patch things over here. And who did Kevin Rudd get to try and patch things over? Mark Dreyfus, okay, who was later Julia Gillard's Attorney General, and he's the Attorney General right now. And he's going to be the guy responsible for amending the Constitution and writing up the new laws if the Indigenous Voice actually makes it. It won't, thankfully.
Isn't
Give
that
them a round
interesting?
of applause. They finished the end tower.
Isn't that interesting though? So you've had all of this coming and going at the very top of Labour. Like you've had Rudd, Gillard, Rudd. You've had various leaders in between, and you've had Albanese. But Dreyfus has been the constant there in that Attorney General role, and in that key position where he can influence what we're sort of driving at today, like in instituting the voice to Parliament, and and I guess sort of cementing Jewish interests, Jewish ethnic interests by making multiculturalism in Australia stronger, or officially anyway.
Yeah, and so, and also at this meeting, you also had Michael Danby, who was Labor's other Jewish member at the time, and he was always like the neocon of the party as well. He's a favorite on Sky News now because they like to just get him on as sort of a way of trying to say that Labor is a bunch of Corbynite anti-Semites, essentially. Michael Danby's like fine to trot out that line. So anyway, at this dinner, according to Rudd, he sat politely at the table while Liebler berated him for committing the hostile act of expelling the Israeli diplomat, When Rudd offered Liebler a briefing with Richardson, Liebler turned angry and made a menacing threat. Here's the best part. Rudd records Liebler as saying, "Julia is looking very good in the public eye these days, Prime Minister. She is performing very strongly. She is a great friend of Israel. But you shouldn't be anxious about her, should you, Prime Minister?"
For once, I believe every word Kevin Rudd says there.
Yeah, I mean, he might be paraphrasing a bit, but yeah, I would say that the effect, the tone that he's captured there, yeah, I don't doubt that at all.
Well, yeah, that's the thing about psychopaths. They know exactly what you mean. Or at least they if we're talking one psychopath to another, a psychopath knows a psychopath, and a psychopath knows what the psychopath means. They misread normal people because they ascribe their own motives to normal people, but that's a whole other matter. Yeah, he knew exactly what he meant.
Right. Well, look, in the next paragraph here, Liebler more or less confirmed Rudd's account of it anyway. He just sort of puts a different spin on it. So he said that, yes, he was blunt with Rudd. He did tell them that the Jews were pissed off with him. He also said that he did mention Julia Gillard, but only once, and praised her for her comments, saying he praised her for saying Israel was justified in responding militarily to missile attacks by Hamas. So, well, here's the quote here. Rudd responded by saying that he discussed and approved the statement by Julia Gillard. I said, "Don't be so sensitive. This is something we assumed." For about 30 seconds, there was dead silence, and I thought Rudd's eyes were going to pop out of his head. And then we reverted back to normal conversation.
And for once, I agree. I believe every word that Mark Leibler has said.
Yeah. But I mean, that would also just be because of the fact that, by then, Rudd must have known that his own leadership was in trouble,
Yeah.
There was already a lot of speculation going on. He had already done that very angry interview with Kerry O'Brien, sorry, where he talked about how he had so fundamentally trashed Brand Rudd. And there were a lot of rumblings going on that he was going to be replaced. So for Liebler to say something like that at that point in time would have infuriated Rudd, I'm sure. And so, yeah, look, it says 3 weeks after Liebler's threat to Rudd, Julia Gillard defeated Rudd in a leadership ballot. So there you go.
It'd be fun to goad Rudd and Liebler into a cage fight, huh?
That would be interesting, yeah. A Mortal Kombat fight to the death.
Yeah.
That would be good.
The Thunderdome. Yeah.
All right, so on to Julia. We've already covered a fair bit of this, but what you see there, that a wholly owned subsidiary of the Israel lobby, that is actually how Kevin Rudd described her in his second volume, The PM Years. So Gowenda said that Rudd's language was verging on a conspiratorial darkness. And that verges on accusing Rudd of being an anti-Semite, I think.
Yeah.
So Liebler responded by saying that Rudd's accusations were far-fetched conspiracy theories.
You're hitting close to the mark when they bring out that gun.
Yeah, and then, so Michael Danby comes out 2018, he says, the incidents that Rudd described had not happened, at least not in our presence. Is that right? Well, Mark Leibler basically said that they did happen. Okay. Like I said, he just to put a bit of a different spin on it, that's all. So I think that's an outright lie there by Michael Danby.
Yeah, well, I guess like Israel's actions, it comes across as Liebler believing that he has every right to threaten the Prime Minister of Australia.
Yeah, most Jews in those positions of power do. I think they believe they've earned that right. And yeah, I guess poor old Rudd thought he could actually take them on. Bit of a mistake. And it was a bit of a mistake for Bob Carr as well, that we'll get to. Okay, so do we remember Julia Gillard's partner, domestic partner? They never married.
Who she's very quietly broken up with within the last year.
Oh, really? Okay.
They've broken up. There was just a little thing in the paper. I didn't have time to write anything about it, but I think they decided, right, your work here is done. She doesn't need to hide the fact that she's a lesbian any longer.
I was going to say, to quote Sam Hyde, "Oh no, please don't go. You're my only beard couple."
Well, it's funny you say that, because there was a rumor that Tim Matheson was gay. And here in Perth, I don't know if you remember the radio. He was like our token right-wing shock jock. I'm not sure if we really have one anymore, but Howard Sattler, he interviewed Julia Gillard, and he asked her about the rumor that Tim Matheson is actually gay. And then he basically got fired after that.
Right. Well, yeah, and there was the great irony that his most notorious moment in the newspapers was when he made a offhand comment about Chinese fingers when it came to men checking their prostates. Part of it is what an odd thing to say. You remember that? Actually, we don't need to go over that. Please continue. I don't want to bring that up.
Okay, well, I'll talk about why I mentioned Tim Matheson here. So,
Joshua.
He had been employed since 2009 as a property sales consultant of Uberta's Group. So that's a fund management and property development company owned by Albert Dayton, who, of course, is a prominent Australian Jew. Matheson was given the position after he and Gillard attended the first Australia-Israel Leadership Forum in Israel. That was an initiative of Albert Dayton. And there you go. You've got him right there. There's the three of them. So yeah, that headline you can see in that newspaper article, being accused of a soft line, that was because people were actually surprised that, considering her background at university and the faction that she was aligned with the Labor Party, you weren't supposed to be that rabidly Zionist. You were supposed to dial it back a little bit. Maybe you were supposed to even say what Tanya Plibersek said back in her early days, where she actually condemned Israel for their settlements in the West Bank. She's never said anything since, though, of course, because the Jews promptly shut her up over that.
It's like that one punk song, "I can't wait for you to shut me up." It's like, I can't wait for Jews to shut me up. Make me feel like a bad guy.
All right. Sanderson often describes what he calls court Jews. So these are basically I'm not sure how you could say it, but
do we keep the court Jews over here?
The main point of contact between an Australian Prime Minister and a leader of the Australian Jewish community. And in Julia Gillard's case, it was Bruce Walpay, I think is how you say his name here.
And if any normies are offended by the use of the term court Jew, ask why no Australian Prime Minister has a representative of heritage Anglo-Australians whose families have been here since the 1800s to represent their interests and suggest that maybe we just wind back immigration a little bit. It's never happened.
Right. So Walpay is actually an American. He was a senior advisor to the Democrat Congressman Henry Waxman. So obviously very well connected politically in Australia. Gillard then appointed him her as a senior advisor. And then Sanderson says here, i.e. court Jew in 2010 when she took the prime ministership. So it says his role was twofold: to develop contacts and interaction with the Australian business community, and to be the contact person between the Prime Minister and the Jewish community. And he is the one who is... by the way, they were in contact, well before 2010. And this is who Goenda believes is... Kevin Rudd and Sanderson believe was the one primarily responsible for shifting Julia Gillard's views to be just completely uncritical of the Israel lobby and of Israel generally. So 3 months after she became PM, it notes here, she, I guess you could say, made the very serious tactical error of appointing Kevin Rudd as foreign minister. I think the reason why she did this is because she actually thought, well, look, if I throw him a bone, maybe he will be somewhat forgiving.
He'll try not to sodomize me for 15 minutes.
I can hear you. Yeah. You're trying to hold back laughter there, David.
Yeah. Well, it's the thing about psychopaths. The only way to deal with them is to go no contact. And here she is, just inviting him back into her house. It's crazy. It's doomed to fail.
It can't be bargained with. Yeah. It can't be reasoned with. It doesn't feel pity or remorse or anger, and it will not stop until your political career is dead.
Very well paraphrased. Right. Yeah.
Now, look, obviously we know that Kevin Rudd was destabilizing right from the get-go. I think from the moment he was turfed out of the prime ministership, if you remember that long face that he had while he was sitting on the back bench, like the next day or whatever it was, I am positive that in his mind he was already plotting like what he was going to do to bring Gillard down. But what is noted here, going back to the power broker, is that Liebler said that he had come to seriously distrust Rudd. He found him frustrating to deal with. That is, in his role as foreign minister. And then Liebler claims Rudd was courting the Arab bloc at the UN by signalling that Australia might vote for a resolution in the General Assembly declaring a Palestinian state. So not only was Kevin Rudd planning to destabilize Julia Gillard, but I think he just wanted to kind of take revenge on everyone that he blamed for his downfall. And that included Mark Leibler and the Jewish lobby. And, that is why he started to make some of these more pro-Palestinian gestures. Just to kind of...
Who knows? Who knows if he'd managed to win the election against Tony Abbott, perhaps we could have gas chambers by now.
Maybe. Because, Rudd's rage and vindictiveness, his desire for revenge, it didn't seem to ever go away. You know what I mean? I remember Mark Latham described it as a jihad of revenge. And he said that, when he himself lost the Labor leadership, he went through around a year of, being a little bit bitter about it. But then he moved on. And he said, but in the case of Kevin Rudd, he went on for 3 years, mainly on the back bench, just doing nothing but plotting a comeback and ripping Julia Gillard away from the prime ministership, So, okay, he might not have gone as far as gas chambers, but yeah, who knows what he might have done.
he might have cancelled that. He might have cancelled that dual citizenship. He may have done some big symbolic thing.
Right. Okay, so the final paragraph here, there's a precursor, obviously, to part 5, the final part, is that you had, I can't remember who it was who resigned. I think it was Mark Arbib, but the senator who resigned, and then former New South Wales Premier Bob Carr, another Labor leader, was parachuted into the Senate, and then he became the new foreign minister. At that point in time, Julia Gillard did not realize that Bob Carr had actually moved away from just being completely pro-Israel. But Mark Leibler was aware of that, of course, because that's just what he's all about. So
The walls
while
have
he was
ears.
very-
The trees have
Yeah.
ears.
yes. So while he was very confident that, he had Julia Gillard in the back pocket, it wasn't so much for old Bob Carr. Okay. So let's move on to part 5 here. I'm not sure who that Jew is there that he's talking with.
I'm not sure who's Jewing who at this point. Although the chat is
All right.
trying to spell out letter by letter a solution to this in Odyssey. They're just having a lot of fun over there in Odyssey for some fucking reason.
That's great.
Oh,
All right.
fucking
So,
God.
I shouldn't have mentioned gas chambers.
remember, guys, we are on YouTube now. So,
Yes.
do have to
Not
say-
for long.
yeah.
I will not spell out what the solution is, but fucking Odyssey is trying to.
Okay. So, as you can see by this subtitle, friend and then exasperated foe of the Israel lobby. So, yeah, Bob Carr was, just always typically pro-Israel. Bob Carr is a neoliberal multiculturalist. He's actually married to a Malaysian woman. The former Liberal leader, John Brogdon, actually had to resign because he called her a mail-order bride. I don't know if you remember that one.
Yeah, someone in Odyssey chat already fucking noted on that. It was like mail order car.
Oh, right. Okay, good. We have good memories of it. And but man, you know what was really fucked up about that? About a week later, John Brogdon actually slashed his wrists in his office. He tried to kill
Whoa.
himself. Yeah.
Well,
Because
there's
the-
nothing worse in the modern West than being labelled a racist, is there?
That's exactly right. Yeah, exactly right. I mean, the media was relentless and unforgiving. And
Yeah.
Bob Carr, publicly did not accept his apology either. You can see why that would weigh pretty heavy on you.
It,
Okay,
honestly,
so anyway.
racism aside, I'm incredibly suspect of any dude who has some Asian wife, no matter her status and etc. Solely for the fact that I spoke to a family friend who had an estranged member of their family come over to some little meetup, and he was talking strictly economically about how he obtained his wife. He was like, yeah, she's gonna stay with me so long as I buy a cow for a village back in the Philippines once a year. I'm just like, holy fucking shit! Your entire relationship is an economic exchange.
I would
How
love
do you-
that. Seriously, that's a great way to operate. It's just you're not going to be divorce raped. You've got the power there. It's fantastic. I think we should. We don't maybe need to go quite.
I'll bring
so
back
far,
the
but I'd love-
dowry.
Yeah, I would love to return to more traditional times. I've got no problem with the dowry.
Motherfucker, the dowry is a one-off payment. This is a subscription to have a fucking
Subscription.
You went from start of license payment to fucking subscription software, literally. Holy shit. It's even bad in terms of those. Oh my fucking God, I'm gonna die laughing, sorry.
Yeah, I'll stop playing devil's advocate. Let's
Holy shit, man, you went there. And yes, it was one cow.
All right. So, how did this shift come about with Bob Carr? How did he start actually becoming less pro-Israel? Well, it started back in 2003. You had the Sydney University's Peace Foundation. So this would each year award the Sydney Peace Prize, to whoever they thought deserved it. And this year, on that year, 2003, it went to a Palestinian activist and politician called Hanan Ashwari. And Bob Carr was invited to present the award at the ceremony. So when they found out that was happening, that is the Jewish lobby in New South Wales, so Colin Rubenstein, who was the co-founder of AJAC, was naturally outraged at that. he called Ashwari an apologist for violence and terrorism, and actively lobbied Bob Carr to not turn up to that ceremony and award the prize. But Carr refused to do that. So the city of Sydney, that was one of the sponsors of the prize, suddenly announced it would boycott the ceremony over that. Now, I don't think this really caused much of a stir at the time. Now, think about, wasn't it only just like, was it the end of last year, maybe even the beginning of this year, that there was like a group that was actually boycotting some festival in Sydney because it was getting Israeli sponsorship? And I believe it was one of the acts was a dance act called Decadance. It was an Israeli dancing group.
Yeah.
You remember that? Quite appropriate for them to call themselves Decadance. But Sky News went absolutely apeshit over that and said, this is BDS style activism and everything. But it's perfectly fine for, say, the city of Sydney to actually go and boycott it. And you'd have to obviously question then how much influence was Australian Jewry exercising over the city of Sydney at that point in time.
And Sky News, you see that Rambam scholarship just paying itself off right there too.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so the head of the Sydney Peace Foundation said that they were subjected to severe pressure, including abusive phone calls. They noted that there were threats that were made to our supporters to the effect that their interests might be affected if they pursue their association with the Peace Prize. And Gowenda has no doubt recent Carr was subjected to abusive phone calls from individuals who see anti-Semitism and hatred of Israel everywhere. All of this over the award of one bloody prize in Sydney. Oh,
well, it's that perfect example of like they don't let their enemies have anything.
No.
In the same way that like we might have one fundraiser which raises $5,000 for somebody, for a nationalist, and they cry blue murder about that and get it shut down. When they have not just millions or billions, they have literally an unlimited supply of money. They don't want you to have anything. They don't want you to have any oxygen whatsoever. And they don't want you to have any resources at all.
Yeah.
Well, again, like if you attack one of their fundraisers, you've murdered someone, and they scream bloody murder about it, but they literally shut down every single last one of these things or anything that we try to do, and that's completely fine. That is completely within the company's rights, or etc. Like whatever argument is useful at the time. And that is completely fine and kosher. So like, like it's the fucking, I don't even want to call them hypocrites because they know what they're doing.
Yeah.
Right now,
it's their MO. Yeah.
This is actually now where we start to talk about the issue of strategy and tactics that organized Jewry use. And as we said, this is the point of disagreement between organized Jewry. And, that is what is always used to argue that they're not actually a monolith. But they're always united in actually furthering Jewish interests. So here's what Liebler actually said about that whole debacle. He said, "It was not that important. Sometimes we have to know when silence is best. I think I've certainly learned not to react to everything. And I think I've learned to say things in a more measured way." So he was just saying there, like, sometimes over issues that are small, because obviously this was just a small thing. It was just an award. If you blow it up and you have this enormous temper tantrum, that's when people start to actually turn their heads and notice the Jewish lobby and say, whoa, actually, these people are really powerful and they seem to be able to get their way a lot and they seem to react to everything.
Shut it down, the Goyim know. That's what this is. That's exactly what that meme is. Like, if people have seen that meme of the Jew shouting into the telephone, probably ordering some food or something, but with the caption, "Shut it down, the goyim." No, this is exactly what they're talking about. Our overreaction is causing too much noticing amongst non-Jewish people of our actions.
Yeah, so when we mentioned Rabbi Botiek before, like saying that he actually
Shmuley
found
Botich.
Dave Chappelle, Botich, or is that how you say it? Okay,
Botich,
well, anyway,
Botich.
when he said that he did find Dave Chappelle funny, that was part of that strategy. He's like, shit, we've overreacted here. People think we're, just a bunch of whingers, and we're overreacting all the time to tiny little things. We've got to rein it in a bit. Oh, so I'm going to go out there and actually say I found it really funny. So then Liebler was asked if he believed that AJAC's actions were responsible for turning former friends like Bob Carr into enemies. And then Liebler said, making us responsible for our enemies is to blame Jews for anti-Semitism. I utterly reject that.
Yeah.
Well, come on. Didn't you basically admit it before when you were saying that the overreaction was a strategic mistake?
Yes.
Come on.
Yes.
You were actually saying that organized Jewry can cause anti-Semitism.
It's that constant doublethink. They say it one moment, but then they deny it the next. It's why I said last week, actually editing these articles, like reading through them, it kind of put me in a head fog, because that kind of deliberate doublespeak is designed to make you crazy. It's designed to make you go, oh, it's all too hard.
It's just designed to fucking literally clog up your fucking brain. It's like in terms of the greater understanding of how these people interact with other populations, you have to understand this little quote is guns don't I kill people with guns. It's like, no, Jews don't cause anti-Semitism. I cause anti-Semitism with exposure to Jews. Yeah, that kind of thing. Okay, so Bob Carr did mention this in his own memoirs. What are they called again? Run for Your Life. I remember that. I've never read it. It would be as boring as fuck. But I do remember at the time he people were getting excerpts from it where he complained about sometimes he wasn't flown first class. You remember that? And so you had headlines like memoirs of a first class tosser. And I thought, I think that describes Bob Carr just right. But he described this, as you can see here, as a storm of criticism. He said it was a shock and an insight. Soon after my participation was announced, Jewish leaders launched an international campaign to force me to withdraw from the award. So note that international campaign. It wasn't just Australia. There were Jews and Jewish groups from all over the world who were actually contacting Bob Carr over this one bloody award. Oh, God. An international race of cosmopolitans attacking me from all over the world. My Jew voice is really fucking gay, and I'm not changing it. I'm sorry.
What's also interesting here is we have two high-profile Labour figures, both pointing out the undue influence of Jewish ethnic lobbies on Australian politics. But
we do have a blanket question. Where's the fat cunt?
Huh?
Yeah, from Odyssey chat. Where's the fat cunt?
I don't know who they're referring to.
Yeah. He's just big bone.
Okay. Maybe only read our questions that we know how to answer, because I have no idea what the hell they're asking me.
I don't know. The Odyssey chat has been on a fucking wild ride tonight, so yeah.
Okay. So anyway, he said, the hold of the Israel lobby over Australian politicians is based on two facts. First, the donations to political parties from the Jewish community leadership. Second, paid trips to Israel extended to every member of parliament and journalists. That is the Rambam fellowships. From the Australia, Israel and Jewish Affairs Council, over 700 trips alone. No other community treats politicians as their poodles. Wow. So yeah, there are actually some pretty strong words there from Carr saying that organised Australian Jewry treats politicians and journalists as poodles.
Yeah. And this sort of reinforces the point I was making earlier. And kind of my paraphrase of Julia Gillard, like it's not all the Jews, but it's a great deal to do with it. Like what you've got here are three guys and a very informed audience listening, who have a very long political memory of all the ins and outs. Like we understand the personalities and the political ideologies of of Australian leaders, like actual Australian leaders, and how they have a play against one another and all that sort of stuff. But you also see like the key influence of Jewish ethnic lobbies to basically always get what they want at every single turn. And as we sort of keep driving, like to always push multiculturalism in Australia and to always push their own ethnic interests in Australia and for Israel. And that's the intersection that we're talking about. We understand Rudd was a psychopath. We understand that Carr was a tosser. We understand that Julia Gillard was a lesbian. But at every stage, like it's always about, okay, what's good for the Jews? That's always their approach.
It was quite literally in his fucking biography.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah, and they openly state it. Yeah,
yeah.
Again, in part one, I said this is a phrase you might be familiar with. Is this good for the Jews?
Yeah.
Okay, so here we actually have what was, I guess you could say, the first major policy dispute or disagreement between Julia Gillard and Bob Carr during his time as foreign minister. So this is in 2012. And this was over a vote that was coming up in the UN. It was a resolution to grant non-member status to Palestine. So it was sort of an indirect way, I guess, of acknowledging Palestinian statehood or recognizing it. By this point in time, not just because of this incident, I don't think. I'd say that Bob Carr just sort of was motivated to become more aware of the politics of the Middle East. And he had become increasingly pro-Palestinian, and he wanted to vote in favor of the resolution. Gillard, however, was, quote, adamant that Australia should vote against it. So Bob Carr then turned to the others in the party, actively lobbied them to support the resolution, and he was actually quite successful in getting a large number of them on his side. So, in the end, Gillard was actually forced to compromise, and the official position taken was that Australia would abstain from voting on the resolution, which, of course, you were able to do. Now, it says here, Carr was convinced that Bruce Wolpe, so that's Julia Gillard's court Jew, was Liebler's spy in the Prime Minister's office. Said Carr shared this view with Liebler at a meeting at the ABL offices in Melbourne. According to Liebler, Carr spent an hour ranting and raving and yelling to the point that it could be heard all over the office. Wolpe's name got several mentions. After, the two men hardly spoke to each other again and avoided each other as much as possible. Such was the level of distrust between them. So, yeah, this is Bob Carr basically saying the Jews were spying on me during this point in time, because they were so pissed off that I was pushing for this yes vote at the UN.
If only all we had to do to make them go away was just to yell at them.
Or just to say no.
Yeah.
That normally works.
Yeah.
God, yeah. And see, Bob Carr actually wrote a second memoir as well, called Diary of the Foreign Minister. Who the fuck reads this? No, and I mean, I'm talking about a guy who's been like deeply interested in Australian politics since I was about 16, by the way.
Mm.
But I would never pick up a fucking book like that.
Yeah. Yeah. That's how boring this.
Who reads this? The terminally fucking gay.
Okay, so what Carr did describe in this second memoir called Diary of a Foreign Minister is that he found it exasperating he couldn't even issue a routine expression of concern about the spread of settlements without aggressive pushback from the lobby. So he said that what was practiced when he was foreign minister, as well as when Rudd was foreign minister, was that every single statement that he was due to make to the media regarding Israel and Palestine had to actually be vetted by Julia Gillard first. She had to read over it. And on several occasions, those statements were vetoed. He just was not allowed to come out and say what he actually thought.
So she was their shiksa.
Yeah, and I mean, and the whole time you had Walpay spying on Bob Carr and whispering in Julia Gillard's ear, saying, "Hey, you have to keep this guy under control. You know, he's not a poodle, so you've got to tame him."
It's amazing. The Jewish ethnic lobby seems to react as sensitively to any support for Palestine as China does for any support for Taiwan.
Right. Okay. So look, this just goes over a little bit more on the whole Rambam stuff that we already kind of knew about. Here's I really like this quote. This one is from Julia Gillard. So this is being asked about the influence of AJAC and Liebler in particular on Australian politics. She said, "Look, yes, in the sense that the Jewish community in Australia, the Melbourne community in particular, because I know it best, is well connected. Put it another way, the community has done a good job over many years of developing deep connections across both sides of Australian politics. They therefore have the networks and the access to put a particular point of view." All right. Julia Gillard's allowed to say that because she's saying that influence is a good thing. You know, There's positive connotations to the way she expresses that, the tone in which she expresses it. So she's allowed to say that. But, put another way, this is Julia Gillard saying that Australian Jewry is extremely powerful and influential.
Oh, it's worth quoting that word for word on a regular basis. I might actually do that. I might quote like word for word that quote whenever I refer to Jewish ethnic lobbying in XYZ articles, because she's basically just made our case for us.
Just fucking spelling it out.
Yeah.
Just in nice floral words.
And notice she also singles out Melbourne in particular. No offense to Melburnians, but I
offend away. This is the hellmouth.
Well, actually, this is sort of a way of let's say taking the blame away from you a little bit, because I don't think it's any coincidence that Melbourne is so posed and also has the highest Jewish population in Australia. That is no coincidence.
Yeah.
So I'm not going to lay the blame on all Melburnians. It's because of this undue Jew influence that you have.
It has been duly noted.
It's the Jews.
Okay. Now, of course, this is a discussion about the voice. And we are going to, if you're wondering, we know we're really just kind of crawling around the background of Liebler here. We will get to the voice, so we'll go through this next bit a little faster. But this paragraph here kind of goes to that. So this is in 2010. Gillard appointed Liebler to co-chair her expert panel on constitutional recognition of Indigenous Australians. In 2017, a proposal from the expert panel recommended that an Aboriginal advisory body be included in the Australian Constitution. Aboriginal activist Marcia Langdon claimed that Liebler told her that his own history, being Jewish, gave him a great understanding of the genocide of the Indigenous people, and there's no question that it did. There you go.
Yeah, it's right there. So we see just how long this the groundwork has been put into the current referendum. I think in the last episode we talked about how John Howard sort of got Liebler to be involved in some committee. Was it the Reconciliation Committee or something like that, Finia?
Yeah, Reconciliation Australia. They were responsible for putting out the Uluru Statement from the Heart.
Yes. And so again, he's just at that key moment where they're like, okay, this is one of the key sort of cultural battles that we want to fight in the course of the next decade. They're always planning, okay, what's going to be the next big cultural battle? Let's lay the groundwork. Let's get Liebler in. Let's get the Jewish ethnic lobbyist in at that key moment, and they make sure that they're there just to really push it along.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so we're going to fast forward to the Abbott, Turnbull, and Morrison governments, the three coalition prime ministers that we had. Now, look, all of them were, as you can imagine, in the pocket. In the case of Turnbull, he was the member for Wentworth, which has the highest Jewish population of any electorate in the country.
He was also a crypto Jew too, wasn't he?
There were rumors that because his mother died, I think before he was born or at a very young age. I'm not sure what it was exactly. He was raised just by his dad, and there were rumors that his mother was Jewish. I'm not sure.
Okay.
But Wentworth is sometimes jokingly known as Nose Bay as well, and there's some really piece of shit obnoxious rich Jews who live in that electorate.
The one who was suing other people for defamation for posts on Facebook. That's one that comes to mind.
Yeah. I mean, God, look at this picture here. So you've got Josh Frydenberg, you've got Mark Dreyfus, you've got Julian Leeser, you've got Michael Danby. I don't recognize these Jews that they're there with. But there you go. There's that bipartisan divide. You've got 2 Jews from the Liberal Party, 2 Jews from the Labor Party. It just showed there's the kosher sandwich right there. So anyway, this goes through when Morrison just became Prime Minister. And of course, AJAC took to immediately lobbying him. So one was for Australia to officially abandon its support for the Iran nuclear deal. And Sanderson points out that's obviously purely symbolic because we're not a party to that agreement. That's an American thing. And then the second one was to move the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. 3 days after that meeting, Morrison announced that the government was examining the possibility of moving the Australian embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. Now, there's one thing I want to add to this, that I'm not sure why Sanderson didn't mention this. I definitely agree with him that, yes, of course, that's to do with that meeting and Jewish lobbying. That's absolutely true. But at that point in time, you also had the Wentworth by-election. Because remember, Malcolm Turnbull quit Parliament altogether. Yeah, he said that if you remove me as PM, I'm just going to quit and leave. And then you had the Wentworth by-election. And remember the candidates that were running in that election? I'll remind people. For the Liberal Party, you had David Sharma. He was the half Bajit, and he was the former Australian ambassador to Israel. Who did you have as the other main contender? It was the independent, the first ever teal candidate, Karen Phelps, who was a lesbian convert to Judaism.
Right.
as I pointed out before, Wentworth is jokingly referred to as Nose Bay, and one of the richest electorates in Australia and the most Jewish electorate in Australia as well. So the other reason for this, it was because they knew that Jews were going to have the deciding vote in Wentworth. Why else would they run a former ambassador to Israel? So one of the ways they tried to curry favor with the Jewish community in Wentworth was saying, okay, we're going to take the same stance as Donald Trump, and we want to move the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, thus officially recognizing Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. Didn't work in the end, though. It backfired because Karen Phelps actually won. But yeah, that was the other element, of course.
Honestly, I thought that order was going to stand. If I'm being completely honest, I thought that was just going to be swept under the rug. I didn't know that there was going to be some level of intrigue about that.
All right. Well, look, the rest of the article, I don't think we need to go through the rest of this in all that much detail because it doesn't so much discuss their influence on Australian politics and more just kind of describes how the organizations have evolved and grown in Australia. One of the points it does make is that I alluded to this before, which was that the Australian Jewish population is actually more ethnocentric and insular compared to, say, American Jews. It goes on to mention the South African Jews. If you remember that part, David, I was saying that they were, I mean, think of all the destabilizing they did. They were the ones who tipped the balance, to bring apartheid to an end in South Africa, and look at it now.
They're the most cosmopolitan Jews you can get your fucking hands on. I went to fucking high school with one of them. They are fucking terrible. They're these like weedy little fucking dudes, and all they do is that they're entirely motivated by intrigue. Entirely, their entire life is intrigue. They don't even necessarily go in to be a lawyer or something like that. They'll become like a journalist or like weasel their way into politics without actually even doing something like being a lawyer or being some kind of bureaucrat to get into that position, like say Anglo Jews would. Or they'll lead some kind of movement and leverage their power from there. But they're the fucking worst. I'd rather take a ghetto Jew over a South African Jew, literally. In terms of preference, shit sandwich versus diarrhea sandwich,
And they're a good example of what the Jews will do if Australia ever turns to shit.
Leave.
Yeah. So, on the issue of assimilation and intermarriage, Mark Leibler has been obviously very careful that his own children and grandchildren have only married other Jews. And he funds a lot of projects, not just in Australia, by the way. He's active in America because in America, the Jewish population actually has a much higher rate of intermarriage as compared to Australia. So he funds all of these programs to fly diaspora Jews, that is Jews outside of Israel, to visit Israel, to develop more of a connection with the country and their Jewish culture, to build ethnocentrism and discourage intermarriage and integration. He's done that quite effectively.
And all we want is the same thing for our own people. We want that for us.
That's right.
Yeah, that's all we want.
Well, the problem is you fly them to a main capital of Europe. Oh, Jesus Christ.
Paris. I hear it's a riot.
Paris, London, Berlin, Rome, I guess, to a degree. Well, yeah, Rome.
Yeah.
What is the capital?
So it says here,
heat stroke.
The intermarriage rate in Australia is less than half that of the United States, with rates among Orthodox Jews close to zero, because we do have a lot of those. It says this trend has been bolstered over the last few decades by the arrival since the end of apartheid of over 15,000 South African Jews, which are extremely insular. And it says here, marrying out for these intensely parochial Jews means marrying a non-South African Jew.
Yes.
That's what marrying out is to them.
Oh, no. In fact, the one I had to deal with in high school, he was getting out of high school, and he was lamenting. He wasn't really a part of our friends group. He was just like one of those like stragglers, always trying to like impress or like getting our good graces, because some of my friends group and had some rich Anglos in it. Obviously, being coached to like go after the rich Anglos, but he kind of lamented that, oh, like I'm really sad that I don't have the dating options you guys do, because like my parents said they'll disown me if I don't get like my parents said like oh, they'll disown me if I don't get with a South African Jew, just as you said. But it was like, my grandmother's a bit more lenient. As long as I get with an Ashkenazi Jew, then I'm fine. I'm just like I was racist at that time a little bit. I was hiding it, thinking like, oh, like maybe this is just not a good idea. Maybe this is some dumb idea my parents had, being a late teenager, having that going through your mind. But I'm just thinking back, being like, what I was thinking at the time, what in the ever loving fuck?
It's amazing how interactions with Jews red pills you on them, doesn't it? Huh?
Oh yeah, no. Literally at the end, we were just going to university at the time, and I went to one of like little parties with one of my friends who, like, I guess he was nice to him. He didn't really like him, but he was just nice to him. So he came to this party too, and it turns out that like they basically like sorted out a bride for this guy, and the parents, his parents, which are much more reformed, much more better, more modern Jews, were doing a DNA test on his supposed bride, just to figure out if they'll have like if they're too closely related, and if two, there's some kind of like a genetic disease that would form if they had kids.
Gee. Did they do it on the sly? Like, did they just grab her hair like surreptitiously or something, or did?
No, just swabbed her.
Fuck.
Yeah. I got the details. Like literally, like both families agreed. Like we're just gonna do some DNA testing between these two and figure out if they're gonna have like like a fucking Downy or something with like clubfoot, or something that's a little bit functional. And obviously they're angling it for functional because they were like like wealthy Jews. So yeah.
Gee, I'd be worried they're going to use my DNA for like fucking magic.
Oh no, like he even noted that the grandmother was like, "Why are you doing this? Why are you doing this? You're hurting the spirit of our people. Like, why are you doing this?" Saying like, okay, like inbreeding is a part of your culture. All right. This is worse than fucking like was it Greenland? And like Greenland, they've got an app saying like there's again like homogenous to their own fault. And I believe I said this on Last Race as well and everything. Like having an app, so like the girl that you're hitting on at the bar, you just need to check if she's your fifth cousin. No, this girl that this dude was gonna marry was his like fucking second cousin once removed. I'm not fucking with you.
The white pill I was going to mention here was like in a couple of decades' time, like when you look at the demographics of Australia, you're going to have a lot of immigrants coming here who sort of essentially get brainwashed eventually by liberalism, and their birth rate will drop. The groups that are going to actually expand will be Jews, but it'll also be white nationalists and white Christians, because they're the ones who are going to have all the babies, which is a good thing.
I'm not too like afraid of like having Indians here, because I've had to deal with Indians. I know how to command them.
No, that is a major white pill, David. And like
Yeah.
when I was at the anti-drag queen rally and I was
Mm,
looking on the other side, like,
child
I'm sure
puss.
you have an idea of just what they look like.
Oh yeah, I
I
went to
mean,
Melbourne University. Yeah.
I mean, like one thing that was blackpilling is that almost all of them were white. It was like
Yeah.
95% white. But then I just thought to myself, okay, none of you are going to have kids, and about half of you are going to commit suicide in the next 10 years.
They're
So,
actually practicing eugenics.
yeah, you guys are practicing self-regulated eugenics, and you're going to take yourselves out of the gene pool. It's like, I don't really have to do that much. You're going to take yourselves out. So, um, okay, so the last part here is just on the Liebler dynasty. So, Mark Leibler's son is now the president of the Zionist Federation of Australia, which was the group that his father started. Colin Rubinstein's son, who's also an ABL managing partner in Sydney, is the chairman of AJAC in New South Wales and is also touted to be the successor of AJAC's national body. So, on it goes, and they finish it off here, just talking about how their stance regarding multiculturalism has shifted a little bit, and that is that they're fine with multiculturalism as long as you don't get so many Muslims pouring in. So they talked about the rise of certain populist right-wing parties in Europe that arose because of the migrant crisis against Muslims. And then, lo and behold, it also turns out that a lot of people in these parties are anti Semites as well. So it's not just the Muslims who are there, who, pretty much any Arab Muslim by default is who's going to be an anti Semite or at least anti Israel. It's also the kind of backlash and fury that they whip up, political reaction, essentially, and not just in Europe. And when you do get a strong anti-immigrant sentiment brewing in a political party, well, it's only a matter of time until someone says, who's the one actually inviting them in? Who's opening the floodgates here? It's the Jews. And, and this is actually what I think, in a nutshell, is neoconservatism. Neoconservatism is basically where American Jews said, these European Christians, maybe they're not actually so bad. Maybe we can actually use them as useful idiots, because our real enemies right now are actually Muslims. They're Arabs. They're Persians. They're the people who surround Israel and threaten its existence. And, we can convince Christians that we're the chosen people, and we can use them for political ends in the Middle East. That is basically how neoconservatism started. And that sort of shift in the stance of Mark Leibler and Colin Rubinstein and other Australian Jews is that same transition, supposedly going from left to right. But what ultimately is it? It's a change of strategy. They're saying, okay, the multicultural thing, maybe it actually has some golems. It's got some bugs in the system that come back to bite us later on. So we've got to tweak this program a little bit. So let's pretend that we're actually right wing now and that we, want restricted immigration.
In doing so, they've also been able to sort of get the right. They've been able to get normie conservatives on board with multiculturalism. It's that whole illegal immigration versus legal immigration. We can have lots of immigrants as long as they're the right sort. We don't mind the Asians because they're quiet and they do business. That sort of attitude. They've been able to normalize that as well.
Yeah, and then in America right now, like you're dealing with the this like kind of. I don't mean to offend Christians by saying this at all. When I say like the phony rise of Christian nationalism, it is kind of being propped up because like, there's like, this accessory argument that's saying like, oh, look, the Hispanics coming over the border, they're all Catholic. They're all Catholic Christians. It's like, no, they worship like this weird fucking pagan voodoo version of it that's mixed in with like kind of like Aztec death cultism. And also, like they're nowhere near your understanding of Christianity. They're running that up over there, and then they'll run that up over here if they can.
It's why I am a Christian who is a nationalist. It's why I don't push Christian nationalism, basically. It's why I basically take the attitude: if you're pro-white, you're all right. That basically informs my understanding of it. I'm also wary of attaching a label to Christian. I do like the exception I make is primarily for Adam Piggott. Like, he doesn't describe himself as a Christian nationalist. He describes himself as Christian. Like, if someone asks him, "What's your political views?" he just says Christian. I'm cool with that because like, he's not trying to sort of smash two concepts together.
Yeah, no. Again, like,
let's get immigration under control first, and then we can argue about religion.
Do you know what? Like, my theory is actually that Ragnarok is actually what happens after we win. Because this multiculturalism business, that like our country's being invaded, that's small fry. I think things will really hit.
If I get to go on brutal murder campaigns in heaven, I'm completely happy with it.
Things will really heat up once we don't have any other enemies. We can just get back to fighting each other.
All right.
That will be the moment that we really need to go multiplanetary. I'll stop tangenting now.
That's okay.
I've got dibs on Mars.
So look, that is basically it. So that's the they're the 5 essays. So of course, look, guys, we've only kind of given you a crash course in it. So I really recommend going and actually reading those articles in full. They're really interesting, and just checking out Brendan Sanderson's work generally. Really excellent writer. He's the Australian Kevin MacDonald, I think, is the way I would describe him. Okay, so what we just wanted to touch on now, we don't have all that much time left, but is just a bit on what Mark Leibler has done in terms of promoting the Indigenous voice to Parliament. So look, he was actually appointed to 2 separate bodies, both by Julia Gillard, by the way. So he was appointed to Reconciliation Australia, and they're the ones who put out the Uluru Statement for the Heart, which is seen as either the precursor or the blueprint even for the model of the Aboriginal voice. And he was also appointed to the expert panel on constitutional recognition. And that was the one that actually just drew up the proposal for the Indigenous voice to Parliament. So I was just rooting around on the internet, and I just found this old article here from the Financial Review.
In their own words.
Yeah, in their own words. So look, what this was this was just prior to the release of The Power Broker, the book by Michael Gowenda on Mark Leibler. And so the Financial Review got a copy of this early, and they were able to review it, and they also interviewed Mark Leibler in it. So let me just Control F this, and I'll bring up these parts here. So here's the part where it goes into it. So it says, but his energy and passion also go in other less expected directions, such as strong backing for the first Australians to have a constitutionally recognised voice to Parliament, a treaty and an agreement for truth-telling about Australia's past. Okay, you note that? It doesn't just say a voice to Parliament. It also says treaty and an agreement for truth-telling. Now, in Queensland, they are developing a treaty. That means that Anastasia Palaszczuk is just drawing up compensation payouts for various Aboriginal tribes. And in Victoria, you poor buggers have already got truth-telling. okay, which is basically just where they go out and make public statements. Yes, where they talk about how you stole their children, raped their women, and massacred them. Okay. And I mean, it's such an Orwellian term, truth-telling, because it's the precise opposite. Everything they are saying in these truth-telling ceremonies is just complete bullshit. It's utter crap.
To do a great paraphrase, it's their truth.
Right. Yeah. Oh, and of course, we've also got a legislated voice in South Australia, albeit we have to wait till March next year to get that. But nonetheless, remember, this is the man who, as I said, has chaired two committees, two major bodies, the ones primarily responsible for promoting and drafting what the voice would actually look like. This is the man most responsible, and he's saying, no, we don't just want a voice to Parliament. We also want a national treaty, and we want a national agreement for truth-telling as well. So, all these people who tell you that, no, it's just an advisory board, and that's all it's going to be. It's not going to lead to anything else. No way. There's always something around.
It's already been said as such. Like, literally, you've already had speakers here, including Reid herself, saying that, like, no, like, this is the first step into something else. Thomas Mayo, or Mayo, depending, has already said, like, no, this is the first step in revolution because he's a fucking communist hack and half a Jew. Again, I just want to reiterate that. Or a quarter Jew, being generous. But yeah, like, it's already been said by the authors of it that this is a step to something greater.
Absolutely.
Also, I'd like to reiterate a meme that I particularly like. It's not the voice to Parliament; it's the invoice to Parliament. I like that so much.
On Teela Reid, what I found interesting was that one of her tweets was actually critical of the way that Labor is trying to sell the voice. Like, she's saying, look, don't try to sell the voice by telling people that it won't be all that powerful, because it is. Like, she used the term disingenuous, because, like, I found that quite interesting, because, like, I've been making the point on XYZ. They're saying one thing to the Australian people, and they're saying another thing to Aboriginals and Aboriginal activists. They're telling the Australian people that it's a modest request, while they're telling Aboriginal activists this thing is going to be huge. So, like, even Teela Reid is getting pissed off at the doublespeak.
Right. Okay, so he goes on here to say he is passionate about the need for more reconciliation with First Australians, including the constitutional recognition, blah-de-blah. Okay, now, Liebler has been deeply influenced by his close friendship with Indigenous Australian leader Noel Pearson, a lawyer who completed some of his training with Arnold Bloch Liebler. Okay. This was something, again, I only just learned this.
Wow. Back when I was a normie conservative, and I thought that Tony Abbott was going to save Australia and get rid of the deficit, get rid of the debt and all that sort of stuff. Noel Pearson was like, he was the good Aboriginal, like, he was the hardline conservative. He was Jacinta Price before Jacinta Price. But again, like, it's the every single time meme. You're like, okay, why is this guy being pushed up to the forefront?
Yeah, it's weird with Noel Pearson. Yeah, you're right. Like, he was sort of seen as like the conservative Aboriginal, like, back then. But I think he has moved increasingly to the left, especially over The Voice. And I saw on that Aboriginal Voice to Parliament Exposed page on Telegram, Noel Pearson apparently called a Queensland minister a fucking white cunt as well. So, yeah. he described himself a lot of the time as a centrist. I don't think he is anymore. He's well and truly become like a radical Aboriginal activist, and that's definitely very telling with his rabid support of the Voice. Okay, I really like this.
You've got to wonder then, like, how much influence Liebler has had over his views.
Oh, definitely, yeah. That's what we're going to get to. So,
right,
I really like this quote, so I'm going to read it out in full. I knew nothing about Indigenous Australians when I went to school. Yeah, I bet, because you went to Jewish school.
Yeah.
No wonder. So the only way you can avoid getting fucking the guilt trip on Aboriginal education in this country is if you go to a fucking Jewish school.
Can I butt in as well? Like this notion that we never used to have education about Aboriginals is complete nonsense. I went to primary school in the 1980s, the dark old days. Some of my favorite books, actually, as a kid, like we had these picture books, which were like picture books of old Aboriginal myths. So I got to learn about all of the sort of, that they believed in like these dark spirits and like all these different sort of creatures, and like it always featured these kids going on adventures and all this sort of stuff. It was cool. And we would get told stories about it, and then we would get told, oh, here's the books about it. And so like this stuff has been going on for decades. It's just that they've ramped up the white guilt over the years. That's the only thing that's changed.
Yeah. My mum likes to actually remind me that when I was a kid that I really liked those Aboriginal books as well.
Right.
On Aboriginal mythological monsters and stuff, like the Clinkins, I think was one of them. Yeah. And I was like, yeah, you're right. But you know what? White people wrote all those.
Yeah.
Yeah, fuck your rainbow serpent, we can have the world serpent.
She does that as like, she thinks that's a troll on me because, my mum does have kind of an idea of what my views are. So she's like, when you were a kid, you liked these books. I'm like, yeah, do you think an Aboriginal wrote those? Hell no. Anyway, so I'll read the rest of the quote here. He said, the first time I really came to grips with this was after I met Noel Pearson, who I regard as one of the most articulate Australians. I know Paul Keating encouraged him to go into politics. I'm very sorry he didn't. He would have been our first Indigenous Prime Minister. His level of intelligence leaves everyone else far behind. He is a remarkable human being. Look, he is for a half-caste, he's probably about as smart as they come, I would say. He's not a full blood, but, he is actually a pretty smart guy. So then he said here, I'm very disappointed in particular with Malcolm Turnbull's reaction to the Uluru Statement from the Heart. Now, remember, this was back when they first released that statement in 2017. Malcolm Turnbull was Prime Minister at the time, and this was when Malcolm Turnbull referred to it as the Third Chamber. Remember that?
Yep.
But then, I think it was the end of last year on 7:30, well, Turnbull walked all of that back, okay? He fully supports it, and he said he was wrong to describe it as a third chamber. So there you go. You don't have to be disappointed anymore, Mark.
Going back a little bit, this seems to be another example, given Liebler's comments about Noel Pearson could have become the first Aboriginal Prime Minister. It's another example of him backing every horse. He's sniffing the political wind. He sees that Pearson was popular at the time, so they're like, okay, let's just get our hooks into him. Also, I think I have described the Voice as a third chamber. I'm actually becoming more radical in my description of what the Voice could be. I think it would essentially become effectively a new executive. And I use Tila Reid's description of it to back up my argument. She described it as something that would exist outside the electoral cycle. So in the same way that these Jews, no matter who gets in power, they have influence over their direct interests. That's the way that the voice would work. In the way that Thomas Mayo has sort of said, it'd be a very brave politician to go against the voice. I think it was Mayo who said that. But basically, like it would reach the point where legislation would not be able to get passed unless it was approved by the voice. And so from there, politicians would realize that the most expedient way to get legislation through would to actually formulate that legislation with direct help from the voice from the very word go. So eventually the voice would have the people, the members of the voice to Parliament would be essentially writing Australia's legislation from the word go. Yep. They would effectively become the new executive. The voice wouldn't be the Chamber of Parliament. It would become the new executive power in Australia.
Yeah, I think that's a better way of putting it, and that's why it's completely irrelevant when Penny Wong reminds us that it's not drawn into the constitutional change that the voice to Parliament would exercise veto power. That's completely irrelevant because of the fact that you would have every member of the executive, of the cabinet, by the balls like that, or you would have looming high court threats challenging legislation that would go against the interest of the advisory board. It's irrelevant. They have an indirect form of veto power. So, yeah, I mean, that it doesn't matter when they say that. Okay, so he says here, if you look back at Uluru, that is the statement, it was the most remarkable and moving closing ceremony. The statement was adopted with total acclamation. So the call for a First Nations voice to Parliament means that everything else is up to Parliament to decide. He says, why is that so difficult? I would imagine that a referendum wouldn't be a problem at all. A lot of polling demonstrates that. Now, this is where he didn't read the tea leaves properly. Of course, yes, polling, like historically, has been very good for constitutional recognition. But once you actually do put it to a vote, or, you know, once you close in on that deadline, it tends to move away. It was not successful in John Howard's preamble to the Constitution, where we voted on that in 1999, as well as the Republic. And, of course, right now, what the latest news poll, I think, had it at 42% approval. The latest Gallup poll had it 38%. They're very bad numbers. So, you know, he's wrong there. So Bennett says here, the second demand is for a treaty. It's an issue where there could be lots of different opinions. He says, what is wrong with asking for a treaty? And then finally, there is a demand for truth-telling. Liebler's response, that's how you move forward. So there's the trifecta. He wants all three. He doesn't want to stop at the voice. He wants to go forward with a national treaty and a national truth-telling agreement as well.
I wonder what his opinion on having a treaty and a truth-telling commission for Palestinians in Israel would be.
Yeah, that would be great.
Yeah. And it gets to the heart of them.
I believe that's called the Hague.
I'm going to read one last quote here from Liebler. The British came here. There was an invasion. We started off by murdering a lot of Aboriginal people and then killing them with kindness. We need to work with Indigenous Australians and not tell them what to do. I am optimistic and I think we're moving in the right direction. And then it says here that his parents apparently were murdered at Auschwitz. And we know a fair bit about pogroms and murder, and that's one of the reasons why we empathise with the plight of Indigenous Australians. So there you go. That's the...
What, did your dad die on the soccer field or in the fucking the auditorium? I guess he drowned.
Yeah, they're notoriously bad at athletics, so yeah, probably.
So, I mean, you know, just like you have the Jew-Black Alliance in America, like through the NAACP, we well and truly have an entrenched Jew-Aboriginal alliance in Australia. You know, that's exactly what he was describing there. Now, of course... Yeah. Well, look, I don't think that he genuinely empathizes with them, though. Again,
Yeah.
to
Oh,
reference
God.
the
They're a tool.
Jew-Black alliance. I mean, what was the NAACP? It was all run by Jews, but it was supposed to be furthering the interests of Black Americans. It's the same thing here, all right? It's a way of undermining white Australia and using Aborigines as proxy warriors. That's exactly what it is. And the here's the one part of the article actually that I found the most interesting, because again, I only learned this when I read this article. Right down the end here, The Power Broker: Mark Leibler and Australian Jewish Life by Michael Gowenda will be launched online by Julia Gillard and Noel Pearson.
Fucking Jesus.
What a bookend. What a bookend to it all.
Actually, you know what? I want to add something to this as well. There's actually one good thing, actually good, going on for fucking like Native Australians right now in Australia. They reopened the idea of using a genomic medical analysis for Aboriginals. Finally, after all these years, I guess they want to pump up the numbers.
Really?
Yeah. So that they're actually looking at Aboriginals as a race when it comes to medical science. They're finally doing it. It's happening in a handful of clinics in Victoria, and then one over here. They're finally doing it after so many years of basically denying it. And then anyone who was like a fucking like an early writer or like a basically like early experimenter and it being labeled as like, some fucking mad scientist who wants to exterminate Aboriginals. They're actually looking at it right now. Now, again, me being incredibly cynical, I think they just want to do that so they can pump up the numbers for a little bit. But they're looking at chronic diseases that apply to the Aboriginal genome.
Right, I was going to say that must have been just for like medical research purposes to stop,
Yes.
their terrible life expectancy rates.
Yeah.
That's like the only time where you can actually admit race a little bit is in medical science.
Yes. Yeah, that's fine. Like the one of the last things we got decently right was how to treat their renal system. And that was only spurred on by the fact of their rampant alcoholism. So yeah, only good thing going for them. Nothing else. Nothing politically. Nothing. I mean, really, like socially, yeah, money, whatever. But like actual good impacts. Yeah, if in my rush, if I had to deal with these people as a captive population, this is what I'd do because it would actually improve them.
Well, in the meantime, I want to encourage people to. I want to encourage activists, inspired by that freeway opening in Western Australia, where they were where they were trying to open a freeway and they were about to burn the gum leaves, and then a rival supposed Aboriginal elder butted in and said, "Oh, we're actually the real elders here." I think something basically whenever there's a welcome to country ceremony at like a public event, I would encourage activists to go along and claim that they're actually the real Aboriginals, and they're the real owners of the land, and they should be burning the gum leaves, and they can't understand why the local government didn't ask them. And the reason I'm actually sort of saying this on air, like I know we're probably like sort of like if we want OPSEC, it sort of destroys OPSEC, but I'm pretty sure that it's going to become a regular thing for rival Aboriginal corporations or clans to sort of claim that they're the ones who have the right to burn the gum leaves because it gets them free gives, it gets them money. So I'm looking forward to those, like when it does actually happen genuinely, to them being accused of being white supremacists.
It
might happen. I'm sorry I didn't see your link before.
Not a problem at all. We've covered plenty. But yeah, I do find it interesting because like this is the second one. Like I thought it was the same because I know that like last week there was a tree planting in Geraldton which was stopped, and I thought this was the same one, but this is actually a second one. So it's basically demanding $2.5 million to plant trees in Perth. So I found Adam Piggott's comments on this today quite interesting. He's basically saying, look, if the Aboriginals had any sense, they would have just hunkered down. They would have kept their mouths shut. They would have said, yes, it's all just going to be modest, and they would have started doing all the demands for money after the referendum. But they're doing it now. That shows how low IQ they are and how low time preference they are. They're like, hey,
Well, look, I would also add that I think it was a strategic blunder of Mark McGowan and Roger Cook to allow these laws on Aboriginal cultural heritage to be passed. I mean, I know they've been on the books for a long time, but, you know, the fact that they have passed them only months away from the referendum was a real strategic blunder, because it's allowed like articles like this one you've written to go up, which is just going to hurt the yes vote even more. I think.
They should have taken the cue from South Australia and pushed it back.
Yeah. I mean, that kind of looks bad as well.
Yes,
because of the fact it's like, hey, we were going to get a test run case of The Voice, or actually, no, now we're not. Why? Why are you hiding that? Are you afraid to show us what the results are going to be?
Yeah.
It's like either way, that was going to be bad.
Yes. Yeah.
So, yeah. No, it's not going to work. Okay. I guess we can leave it there. So I hope we haven't said anything that's going to be get us kicked off YouTube. And guys, just try to keep your comments user-friendly on there. If you want to post anything edgy, do it on Odyssey. We don't really care what you do on there. But, you know, we want to keep the chats open. We want to keep the comments open. And we want to obviously just kind of maintain our existence on YouTube too. So just behave yourselves if you can. But we do thank you for your support. We thank you for...
See ya, fuckers.
.net.au, race.biz. Thank you very much for listening. We will see you next week.